Okay, cool. We're now on YouTube. Hi, everybody. This is Shooting Zhao. Welcome to our very first Kyverno contributors meeting. These meetings are public weekly meetings that are focused. We're now on YouTube. Hi, everybody.
Yeah, you might need to mute the YouTube video.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, these meetings are public and weekly meetings. We'll mostly focus on the topics relevant to Kyverno development and other contributions. And it's mostly provide an opportunity for contributors and maintainers to meet, share, and discuss about any relevant topics in Kyverno. All right, let's jump to today's meeting. We don't have many topics listed in the agenda. We have this variable substitution, and then we're going to talk about the curly bracket. If you have any other topics, please add it to the meeting note. All right, the first one I want to talk about is we need to finalize the behavior of this variable substitution. Like while we're developing 135, we found that the behavior of this variable substitution is not consistent. In this case, I think Jim, you also added some comment to that. We have 3 scenarios for now, I think. The first one is like if the referred path is not valid according to its schema, what's the expected behavior? And then if the path itself is valid, what if the value does not exist? For example, if that tag is not specified in resource, what should be the expected behavior in Kyverno? And then the last is what should be like when the defined value is null or empty, then what should we do in Kyverno? Right, I guess with 135, for all of those scenarios, we just skip replacing those variables, and like the rule is also skipped in that case. It's kind of going silently unless you check the logs or if there's any I guess logs is the only way you can check. But moving forward, I guess we want to differentiate those cases. If the path itself is invalid, we need to throw an arrow. If there's an empty value, we need to handle it differently. So I want to bring this up to like gather what are people's thoughts on this.
Hey, this is Chip. I guess I'll start since I probably put the bulk of it here. I mean, one, as I kind of noted here, one is a much broader issue to solve because we have to have consistent behavior no matter what it is that we do. And if we're going to validate the schema of a variable as a James path expression, we also have to validate the schema of policies. And that's not being done as we know from this issue, or it's being done for some types of policies. I think Jim said it was mutate, but not validate, maybe some other conditions. So number one is, I think, long-term more preferable, but it's probably going to entail more work to get there in order to achieve end-to-end consistency. But I think long-term, that's something that we probably want to have Kyverno behave. 2 and 3, I think those are kind of grouped together in their own bucket. And the way I would probably, I mean, if you look at, if I think about the use cases for when variable validation occurs, there are typically 2 cases that I can see to trigger behavior. One is, does it have some value, comparing it to X, and is it empty? And so in the case of 2 and 3, if it's empty or null, just set the variable to null or empty or whatever, 0, whatever the case might be. And then that's more of a short-term solution that can probably hold users over until number 1 is implemented end to end. But like I said, I think number 1 is probably going to be the longer term, more viable option as long as it's implemented consistently.
Right, agree. I think there is also a use cases that you do with another user before they want to mutate something if that tag is not present. So that means we need to somehow replace the variable to its null value, 0 value, and then apply the policy in that case. I think that's what currently missing in Kyverno. So I guess here with bullet 2 and 3, we should find its way to solve it. But for the schema validation, I think there's, I guess there could involve more work to solve that. So I kind of like wanted to track it in a separate issue, but 2 and 3 is definitely what we can do.
Right, but without 1, 2 is not possible to determine.
Yep, that's a good point.
Right. If the
Because you can't distinguish
tag is not there.
between, right, so for defaults and things like that, it's not possible to determine if the value doesn't exist because of the path or because it's just allowed to be empty, right? And that's the challenge we are hitting today is when we invoke the James path library, it just returns a null. So we have to do some pre-checking before we call that library.
Yeah, so maybe in the interim, just set the value. And I know that Max already has either created an issue or amended an existing one. Just set it to empty, and that way, the bulk of the use cases that are being used now for variable validation can at least have that rudimentary function, which is this value empty? And in that way, be consistent with the built-in variables like service account. So that doesn't involve schema validation, and it'll solve a lot of these use cases that are the sticking point because of the behavior today.
Right. Yeah, and if we do that, we just have to let folks know. I think we had come across one policy example in the Flux project where in their integration test, they're using Kyverno, and they were relying on that behavior that when it's empty, the rule is skipped. So I'm not sure if any other users have also made that assumption, but we'll just have to clarify that policies now need to distinguish between those and add a precondition if they're relying on non-empty values to validate them.
Do you think that's something that we may need to add to the schema, a switch that controls that behavior, or do you think that's overkill?
I think it's, yeah, I was just thinking along the lines of just recommending or at least clarifying what the behavior would be. Because right now it's not obvious what happens if the value is empty, right? Is the rule skipped? Is it treated as an error, or do we continue with the check?
So are you saying that you think this is going to be a breaking change if we change the current behavior so that the value is not skipped and it's null or empty instead? Do you anticipate that being a breaking change?
It was for the policy that Shooting and I were looking at in the Flux integration tests. So, but we have a workaround which we can propose where you would add a precondition to just skip that policy if the value is empty.
Okay, all right. So there is a viable workaround if the behavior is changed. Okay.
Right. So I think that's what we would need to advertise and make sure everybody understands that if they're validating a value, the assumption is that that value is present, because if it's empty, of course, that the deny policy or whatever may fail, right? And the things could get blocked because of the empty now. Previously, we were just skipping.
Yeah, so that'd be an absolutely essential piece to add to the documentation to advertise that behavior.
Right. Yeah, so I think that's fair. We can proceed with that and just make sure that everybody's aware that that change is coming in 136, that they have to be more precise. Because anyways, the other alternative that we were discussing when we saw that was maybe it should be flagged as an error. So the policy is a bit ambiguous, right? It's not clear what to do if the value is empty. Of course, if it's not empty, then it's clear what needs to be done, but yeah, but instead of making it an error, if we say yes, we will process the rule, then the author of the policy just has to tighten up the logic. Okay, yeah, we'll check and see. And I discussed this with Max too earlier in the week, so he's aware of what needs to be done. He was looking at the schema validation as well, and we can proceed accordingly.
Yeah, and just to add one thing, I would probably, from an operational standpoint, I would probably also, if it isn't either in flight or in thought, add a logged message to indicate that whatever that condition is. So the logs would be able to provide the users more information as to those conditions of the third one. Is it empty or is it null and non-existing? The log can print that, so at least users that are either not aware of it or they're trying to introspect and troubleshoot their policies by looking at the logs, Kyverno can tell them, okay, this variable that you supplied, the path isn't there, but we've gone ahead and replaced it. We've gone ahead and set the variable to empty, or whatever the behavior might be, regardless of what the output. If the output's the same, the logs can divulge more information on why that value is set, which would be very helpful for users in either adjusting to or picking up this change.
Right. Okay.
Just one question for that. So you said we want to set the empty value if it's not there, or yeah, I guess it's not there. But in this case, like for example, it is specifically checking that this tag is not equals to it has to be exist in this case, right? Not equals to star question mark means it has to
have some value, like it's a non-zero value.
Okay.
So not that it exists, because it would be, in that instance, it's invalid. You can't have a key without a value in a label. But in this case, it has to have some value. So greater than 0, greater than null.
Okay, that makes sense.
So we can rely on Kubernetes machinery in its validating and mission controller for its own specs to weed out some of these problems. Obviously not all of them, but regardless, we can still control in Kyverno log messages based on the lookups that it performs, why that was set the way it was set. And maybe that doesn't have to be at a default verbosity level. Maybe that could be at a higher level for troubleshooting purposes only, whatever the case might be.
Right. Okay, I guess then that's what we want to achieve. Anything else around this topic, the variable substitution? All right, and I add another issue I want to discuss is like how to skip curly bracket in Kyverno. So currently we're using this curly bracket to indicate this is the variable that we want to replace in Kyverno. But in this case, looks like the user is using the Go template here, and they're trying to set some this value with some environment variable or whatever the thing that's the cloud init script or something. Then we need a way to skip those kind of curly brackets in Kyverno. I also made some comment here. One way we can do is to add a flag, say that we don't need variable validation for a particular rule. Whenever we set it to false, then we don't validate the policy. We don't replace the value. We just by default apply the policy as it is. And another way to solve that is to like replace the current syntax with a different indication. Then that way we don't conflict with such cases.
Do you think it's those are more complicated or more deterministic than just simply wrapping them in backticks or some other character? Or is there a reason that wrapping them in backticks just won't work?
Yeah, I guess it won't work because it's still saying the curly bracket after serializing, and we'll still do the validation on those kind of values.
Well, I mean, is that something that we can adjust the serialization logic to look for backticks and look for the end and then just ignore the values in between? Like, is that simpler to implement than creating a whole new attribute and going through that process?
That's a good point, but I guess in this case, the user already do kubectl apply. So the data is already serialized when Kyverno got that policy, right?
Yeah, but these can also be wrapped. This is the other problem that I ran into in the past, is that these can be wrapped. This can be in a Helm chart, and that's the purpose here. But I could put a policy in a Helm chart itself, and Helm is going to try and replace those values. That's sort of the other angle, but I mean that's Helm's logic and not Kyverno's, but it's the same type of situation.
Right. I recall we have a similar issue, so I asked that user if this is a Helm, but it turns out no. So I guess in that case, we worked around it by adding the backtick or the backslash, something like that, but I couldn't find that thread. But I remember we do have some workaround for that. But in this case, I don't know for sure if adding that backtick would work, but I guess it's worth to investigate a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, I think either one would probably be fine. So is your suggestion for the new parameter, at what level would it be? Would it be a rule level, policy level?
I'm thinking it at rule level.
Okay. So if that's set to true, then Kyverno would just store it, whatever they are, as literal strings and not replace any variables anywhere?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for that particular rule.
Yeah, I don't think that will work well, right? Because it's likely that there's a mixture of things you want to replace and not replace.
Right.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. That's kind of an all or nothing proposition on a per rule basis.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, so let's figure out a new syntax, right? It's maybe we'll continue supporting the parentheses or the two double curly brackets for some time. We can see if we can cleanly evolve to a new syntax, but we'll just have to come up with something that doesn't conflict with Helm and Go templates and Vault and all of these. So I guess that we thought it would be a consistent and a familiar syntax, which is why we picked this. But I guess in hindsight, it just creates too many conflicts and with these other processors. So maybe we already have the $paren, variable syntax for the inline variables. Maybe we can do like $curly brace or something like that. Or we can, maybe in these cases, we require that they put the Kyverno variables with $. No, I guess it has to be all or nothing. So then maybe we just also can do, I don't like 3 characters. So maybe it's just $paren instead of $, or paren.
Yeah.
Something like that.
I'm just curious how widespread this is. Like, this is one example, but it's using a block scalar for this and not a string. So I'm just curious what other use cases there are around this, and how, like, I think this is something that isn't run into very often. It's more of a corner case, but I'm still curious how big of a problem this represents. I mean, it doesn't change the fact that I think syntax could be updated, but I'm just wondering what the impact of it is.
I think we've seen at least 3 examples of this come up so far. So, I mean, it's not huge, but it's fairly common, especially with Helm and things like that, right? Yeah, so maybe if we stick with like the shell or the bash type of escaping, if we just do dollar, dollar and paren, and if we figure out a way to just, when we upgrade, we parse all the existing policies and convert and keep support for both for some releases and then drop paren as a Kyverno variable. I think that's a fair migration path, and gives
Yeah,
people some time to change.
that sounds realistic and like a pretty good approach to me anyway.
Yeah. What about the dollar and single curly bracket?
Right, that's what I mean.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, dollar and brace would be the new syntax, the braces.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then I'll log an issue for that. All right. Go back to the meeting. I see Yash and Frank are online. I know there was some discussion happening around the policy reporter and the Prometheus matrix. Hey, Yash, do you have anything to discuss? Or Frank?
Sorry, my mic was on mute. Yeah, so actually, me and Frank had a little discussion yesterday around like basically any ideas, any possibilities in which we can, collaborate the Kyverno Prometheus integration and the policy exporter he's working on. So he had some nice ideas. So first I would think that I'd present my idea, then I guess we should give Frank a chance to speak about his idea as well. So regarding my idea, I thought that maybe so if we think in implementing from scratch, so yeah, technically we can implement visualization level capabilities like maybe some Grafana dashboard or some other kinds of dashboards over the Prometheus integration. But that would be like reinventing the wheel, right? Because Frank has already done a great work on his part in the policy exporter. So I thought that maybe the policy exporter, or sorry, policy reporter can be actually utilized kind of like a plugin, maybe kind of like a library, where it exposes ready-made functions, ready-made methods with which Kyverno can directly call them and create dashboards out of thin air. So if a person installs Helm, if a person installs Kyverno using Helm and they specify that, let's say there is an argument, let's say there's a flag which says let's create dashboards. So just only 2-3 parameters they have to provide extra, maybe like a target Grafana server on which the Grafana is hosted. And behind the scenes, Kyverno will take that Grafana server and using JSONnet or GraphonNet, basically using the policy reporter projects, functions, and methods, Kyverno will directly create dashboards on the basis of that. Because Kyverno will have metrics on its own, and Kyverno will have the capability to create dashboards via the policy reporter as a plugin. So in those lines, I was thinking. But Frank also had an really cool idea around the policy reporter could also utilize Kyverno by taking the metrics from in the form of API. So, Frank, can you shed more light upon this idea?
Yeah, sure. My basic idea was to create additional service, a Kyverno metric adapter, which uses the new Prometheus metrics and convert them in a JSON API. And so my policy reporter UI can pick up this REST APIs and create, also tables and graphs on it. And it will have a new module system where you can enable special applications like Kyverno to get this additional graphs and metrics for specific applications, while the major advantage or the major pages are still a global policy reporter CRD based approach. So this was the basic idea. So it can work as additional applications and don't have to be inside of Kyverno or look independent.
Yeah, so I guess this idea is pretty cool to a Frank. So in the Frank's idea, this whole component of creating dashboards for Kyverno it's going to be performed by policy reporter, right? So this will basically decouple this functionality of dashboard creation from Kyverno, and we can help the customer, to. So now this can be kind of like taxing on the end of customer because they'd have to install one extra component, but this also can be automated via Helm. So we can just have another template inside Helm where whenever the user installs Kyverno via Helm, another YAML is actually applied as well across the cluster, which installs all the resources and basically policy reporter on the cluster and helps them create dashboards out of thin air without doing any sort of manual work. So both these approaches seem pretty sound to me at least, but I guess we are kind of still in a brainstorming phase where we still think that there might be a little better approaches to find any capability of collaborating both of these projects. So yeah, like we have certain plans to collaborate, maybe have some discussions, some brainstorming sessions to think about any best possible ways of collaborating these two projects in a graceful manner.
And I was also thinking about somewhat of the same thing. I see a lot of value for users in getting Frank's dashboarding tool as an implicit part of a Kyverno install. Obviously, something that could be either opted in or opted out, but the ability to get a UI that shows those types of things and that could be more quickly and easily integrated into an operations tool of some sort. I see a lot of potential value in that, and was something that I was going to bring up. I wasn't quite sure of the venue, but this seems to be a good one. So I guess I think it's a good idea to think about, and from my vantage point, I can see that being a valuable thing.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There is value in having an tightly integrated or at least a built-in dashboard. The one thing to consider, or I guess few things, right? I do also see value in the policy reporter beyond Kyverno, and Frank has been discussing with the policy work group as we are adding support for things like Falco in the future, as well as now KubeBench to generate policy reports. The policy reporter can show all of these, right? So there's the use cases for the policy reporter may be a little bit broader, but it's still fine if it's a Kyverno project and somebody wants to use it without Kyverno, that's also a possibility. And of course, a lot of this is dependent, and Frank, don't mean to put you on the spot here, so we can discuss offline and based on how you see this progressing and where you would like to take the project. But certainly there's value in an integrated dashboard. However, also in the past, I know other users have asked about, hey, can Kyverno be integrated into other Kubernetes dashboards? Like there are, whether I forget the names off the top of my head, but there's a couple of tools. I think there's one from VMware and there's one from Mirantis, which are sort of the leading. And then there's K9S on the CLI, which I don't think Kyverno fits there, but at least the two sort of UI or web-based dashboards. Forget the Chip. Do you know the VMware project name?
Yeah, you're probably talking about Octant and Lens.
Octant, exactly.
Yeah, and Octant would be a good one, and it has a pluggable framework that you can just write your plugins as Go, and they're executables, and then they integrate right in. So yeah, I agree with you. I think that would be another really valuable angle to have.
Right. So I don't know. Again, I don't know what's the. Certainly having something native has a lot of value. Plugging into existing popular tools from an admin point of view has value. And potentially, I think Policy Reporter can have standalone value as it already does and as it adds more features. Maybe, I don't know if you're up for it, we could do a quick poll, right? And just maybe set up like a doodle or some other poll and send it out to, we know at least there's quite a few admins using Kyverno, and see which of these options makes the most sense and get some feedback. I don't know, like if Octant is very widely used or is Lens very widely used. And would the preference be to just fit something in there for Kyverno, or would they be, if Kyverno has a native dashboard, it's very easy to then just point, of course, and it may be both, right? It may not be one or the other. So then if you can bring up Kyverno and point, browser to it, that's fantastic. Even if whether it's installed as one component or multiple, if the experience is seamless, there's a lot of value there as well.
Yeah, I think the two that have the greatest amount of following are Octant and Lens.
Right.
But I think this would be a great poll to put in the Kyverno channel, and maybe even something like Kubernetes users, just to see. I'm curious what the community says. What their opinions are. Do they want to have just a standalone dashboard tool that sort of evolves on its own, or do they want to just delegate to their existing IDE and be able to just plug in? So could be a good question to ask.
Frank or Yash, are you familiar with any of those tools, with Octant, Lens? Have you played with them, or do you, I don't know I think Chip mentioned Octant as a Go plugin model. Not sure how capable it is in terms of, showing charts and other things, but would be interesting to find out.
I am aware of Lens, but I'm not aware of Octant as such. I'll do check it out. Yeah, let's see any opportunities.
I'm running my clusters in Ranger, so I don't know other tools.
Okay. Yeah, so let's, it's certainly open to options. I think maybe if, Frank, I think maybe, if you have some thoughts on how you want to shape the project or what your preference is, we can discuss accordingly. And, certainly having a more native experience for Kyverno users makes a lot of sense as, there's continued sort of value add in the dashboard and the tools we're creating.
Sure, at any time.
Yeah, I mean, either way, I think that, Frank, your work is excellent on that, and it augments the sort of the main tenet of what Kyverno was created to do, which was to much more easily enable and consume and be able to operate policy. And so that same type of philosophy extended to getting visibility into the results of your policy is just a +1. It's a value add to Kyverno's mental model. So, I mean, I think either way it's done, it's only going to further enhance and drive more user adoption, because there's the focus is on usability, the focus is on user productivity, whereas some other tools sort of just leave that up to you to go fish. So I think either way, it's only going to enhance the project.
Yeah, thanks for your feedback.
Yeah, definitely exciting to see what will happen next. All right, I guess that's pretty much the topics we have for today. Does anyone have anything else to discuss? All right, if no, thank you, everybody. I'll see you in the next community meeting. Oh, sorry, contributors meeting. See ya.
All right, thanks, bye.
Ciao.